one of my favorite gospel readings. It occurs every so often, all gospel readings every Sunday, they occur on a rotation basis. So we hear this particular gospel once every 3 years, and that's true of all other gospel readings once every 3 years. Now, today's gospel reading, full text, at least the section that I read, coming out of the 15th chapter of John, verses 1 to 8. The beautiful thing about this particular gospel reading is the images are clear. Its analogies are strong and well-positioned. And whenever you read it, you actually don't need it explained to you, because you read it, you can understand it. So I said to myself, I should read it, everyone can understand it, then we'll just move on with the rest of the mess. But I like to hear myself talk, so we'll give a little bit of explanation of this gospel reading. This is the gospel reading that talks about relationships. Our relationship to Jesus Christ, and how important it is to remain attached to Jesus Christ. And what happens when we detach ourselves from Christ, when we decide for whatever reason to walk away from Christ and say, I don't want Christ in my heart, I don't want Christ in my life, and I don't want the Eucharist to be a part of my weekly devotion. Let's take a look at verse 5 out of the 15th chapter of John. Verse 5 says, and there is that strong definition of analogy. I am the vine, that is Jesus Christ is talking to his disciples. So he is saying, I'm the vine, you are the branches. And then that section continues, if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Now what we know is this, in the plant kingdom, the roots of a vine and the roots of a tree are located in the ground. And the root gathers out of the ground nourishment from the soil. And it gathers that nourishment and it sends it up through the roots, up into the vine, up into the stem of the trunk of a tree. And all the branches attached to the vine or attached to the trunk of the tree, they receive that nourishment and they grow. Jesus Christ is saying, as long as you remain attached to me, you're going to grow. You will have direction in your life. You'll have a sense of centering. You'll just have a life that should be fruitful and productive. And when it isn't, when a storm of your life comes your way, if you are strongly attached to the vine, you'll remain attached to that vine. Because when there's moisture connected in a tree from a branch to the trunk itself, very seldom they fall. And when a branch does fall from a tree and you examine it, there's a good chance that branch is beginning to dry because the crack occurred between the branch and the trunk and it's already starting to wither. Let's take a look at verse 6 now. It's going to be the opposite of verse 5. And then Jesus Christ continues, whoever does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. And it's really amazing what happens when a branch severs itself from a tree. And if you have a storm in your yard and unfortunately a branch falls because of the high winds and the storm itself, and an hour after the storm passes, you go out and examine that branch, what are you going to see? You're going to see, if you look at just one leaf off of that tree, that leaf is already starting to lose its glossiness, it's losing its luster, it's already beginning to shrivel up just an hour after being removed from the trunk of the tree. It's already starting the dying process. And that's what happens in our life. When we decide for whatever reason to walk away from Jesus, I don't want you in my life. You're not going to be a part of my Sunday devotion. I'm not going to receive God, your Son, in the Eucharist. We already start that dying process in our lives. We might not know it, but we become dry inside. And I think the best way to describe this gospel reading, which clearly, because the way it's presented, doesn't need much description, I think is in picture, because pictures speak 1,000 words. So let's put this gospel, especially verse 5 and verse 6, to picture. Let's look at this picture right here. Look at that powerful tree. Tree's beautiful. Now we're getting into the spring of the year where all the leaves are coming on the trees, and when you watch those leaves just beginning to bud, it takes 28 days for leaves to mature, to come into full stature and size. But look at that tree. Every branch is attached to that tree. You see absolutely no death at all in that tree. What Jesus Christ is saying is, we are the branches. He is the vine. He's the trunk. And we remain attached to him. There's growth, there's vitality, there's energy. What else could you possibly want? Now let's take a look at what happens when a storm comes along every so often, and a branch, for whatever reason, storm or just deciding to, it breaks away. It just falls, it just cracks. And this is what happens about a year after that branch breaks away. Let's take a look at the next picture. You see it? Total decay. And if you don't clean up the branch after it's fallen from the tree and you just let it out in the yard, you know sooner or later you have to go out and take care of it. You have to hire someone to go out and take care of it. It is dead. It needs to be removed because it's not going to grow again. It has severed its life from the trunk of the tree. That happens in our life as well. When we just cut ourselves off, say no to Christ, say no to the Eucharist, say no to Mass, say no to Christianity, and just truncate Christ out of our heart, the result is death. So I think the final picture is a picture that really shows us what John the 15th chapter, verse 1 to 8 is talking about. Let's look at this final picture. And there it is. It is the dichotomy of the two. And when you look at that, that is a choice you have to make in your life. Do you want to be the top left or the bottom right? Do you want your life to be full of growth and vitality and energy, and your branch, you're remaining close to that trunk where it just grows? It's the power of that beautiful tree. Or have you decided prior to at certain points in your life to cut yourself away from Christ, cut yourself away from God, and that is the result of the bottom right, where there is desolation, there is death, there's a dryness, there's a loss, there's a weathering, and then eventually just thrown out and burnt. That's really what you see in the 15th chapter of John, verses 1 to 8. Those are your choices in your life. Which choice have you made? But what choice are you going to make from this day forward? Are you going to always be top left? Or are you going to decide every so often, for whatever reason, to be the bottom right?